Hello and welcome everyone once more, and sorry for the delay and the technical difficulties. I will be talking about replications and the epistemic problem of underdetermination as it applies to replication studies, and I will introduce a systematic replication framework, which we simply call SRF. To begin with very familiar notions, the scientific method consists in hypothesizing a certain relationship between some variables of interest and putting these relations to test against experience. And falsificationism has come to be the norm in testing these hypothetical relationships. The falsificationist method takes off from a critique of varieties of inductivist approaches. The falsificationist holds that no inductive logic can infallibly yield information because it rests on an invalid inference, namely affirming the consequent. The fallacy remains regardless of the number of observations, and also when the aim is not proof or verification of the theory, but it's probabilistic confirmation. And this gives us the problem of induction expressed in falsificationist terms. So for the falsificationist, the strategy of trying to prove or probabilistically confirm theories is a dead end. So the viable method instead is to try to disconfirm or refute theories. At bottom, the falsificationist method consists in making a theoretical claim, let's say a conjecture, deriving an empirical prediction from it, and then searching for instances that would contradict this prediction, and thereby refute the theory from which it is derived via a modus tollens inference. However, this straightforward falsificationist strategy is complicated by the fact that theories by themselves do not logically imply any testable predictions. This is the core idea expressed in what is often called the Duhem-Quine thesis. So the DQT gives us one formulation of the broader problem called the underdetermination of theories by evidence, or simply empirical underdetermination. So empirical underdetermination is the thesis that scientific theories or hypotheses have empirical consequences only in conjunction with various other hypotheses or assumptions, ranging from ceteris paribus clauses, all other things being equal, or let's say no other factor intervening, to implications of previous theories or various assumptions regarding the instruments being used, or the validity of the operationalizations of the theoretical terms linked in the main hypothesis, or the accuracy of the measurements, and so on and so forth. So since it is impossible to test a scientific hypothesis in isolation, this confirming evidence leaves us underdetermined in our decision as to whether the main theoretical hypothesis or one or more auxiliary hypotheses should bear the burden of falsification. So in other words, what we learn from an empirical test with disconfirming results is that at least one element of the bundle of hypotheses that enter the test together needs to be modified or abandoned, but not which one. So in this regard, any isolated hypothesis test poses in fact a bundle of independent questions, to all of which it receives only a single answer. It's like our Kepler, Leibniz, and Newton here asking completely independent questions, and or Einstein just answering with a no. So in the context of single hypothesis testing, we have at the minimum two such auxiliary hypotheses, because the simplest falsifiable scientific proposition hypothesizes a certain relation, be it causal or correlational, between two terms. Let's call these X and Y. So more precisely, we need a hypothesis, let's say the predictor auxiliary, that links the theoretical predictor to the observational or observable predictor, and another hypothesis that links the theoretical outcome, let's call it YT, to the observational outcome, and let's call this the outcome auxiliary. Since auxiliaries are inherent to any operationalization process, what the DQT implies in single hypothesis testing situation can be metaphorically visualized as an invisible table with two legs, as you see here. So the main theoretical hypothesis, the TH, corresponds to our tabletop, because it is the part serving the main function of a table. And the auxiliaries are subsidiary in hypothesis testing, and they are not the main focus of investigation. But they're necessary because the terms that are linked in the TH in our theoretical hypothesis are conceptual constructs, and thus they need to be operationalized into observable factors. For this reason, the auxiliary hypotheses correspond to the legs of the table in our metaphor, which both lift the tabletop and connect it to the ground, and ground being, in this case, the actual empirical test of the relationship between X and Y, and all observable factors and relationships are exhausted by what is on the ground. So when we reformulate the modus tollens of falsification in these terms, our antecedent clause becomes a TH, such as this one, and at least two auxiliaries, and our consequent clause becomes some association between largely observational terms. Thus, we can express what I call the ambiguity of falsification implied by the Duhem-Quine thesis minimally as such. So let us have a look at how this metaphorical table can be used in analyzing a concrete hypothesis testing situation. Let our TH be social class and intelligence are positively associated. Let's assume our theoretical claim to involve a preference for directionality, so intelligence predicts social class. We decide to operationalize our first theoretical construct, intelligence, in terms of academic aptitude and measure it through SAT scores. In parallel, we operationalize social class in terms of consumption habits, which we then measure by rummaging in people's trash cans. Now, empirical underdetermination significantly limits the kind of conclusions we can draw about scientific hypotheses on the basis of single tests. Firstly, corroborative findings in an isolated study can hardly ever be used as support for the main theoretical hypothesis, since the findings may as well be an artifact of the particular coupling of various auxiliaries. So the relationship between SAT scores and the contents of trash cans might hold for other reasons than the hypothesized one. Addressing this ambiguity is far from being mere philosophical nitpicking, because the implications of accepting the results of single tests or even aggregates of isolated replications as confirmation of a theoretical claim, such as this one, often has very serious practical consequences. For instance, the book Bell Curve has been used and continues to be used as scientific grounding in far-right politics. And the APA, the American Psychological Association, had to form a specific task force to investigate the claim and the reported tests, which concluded eventually that the claim is not substantiated given the findings, but mind that the book is still well cited. On the other hand, the ambiguity of non-corroborative findings, or ambiguity of falsification, creates a vast playing field for refutation evading strategies. So Duhem, Lakatos, and many others maintained that absolute falsification is impossible, because in the face of a failed prediction, the target of the modus tollens can always be shifted towards the auxiliary hypotheses and away from the theory. So any scientific theory can be, in principle, saved from refutation forever while remaining scientific, that is to say, producing falsifiable predictions. So if the results are disconfirming, our researcher can, for instance, blame the auxiliary hypothesis that SAT scores are a valid measure of intelligence, or that social class can be measured by rummaging in people's trash. And Popper acknowledges this logical possibility as well. So he was not unaware of the necessity of auxiliary assumptions or hypotheses in deriving empirical consequences and the difficulties haunting falsification in relation to these. However, Popper relegates auxiliary hypotheses to unproblematic background knowledge, which the scientist needs to demarcate from the theory under test by taking certain methodological decisions. So thus, Popperian methodological falsificationism doesn't deny the role of auxiliary hypotheses per se, but doesn't regard or suggests not to regard them as part of the empirical test situation. Thus, for him, any decision to blame an auxiliary hypothesis after a failed test is impermissible. The task of demarcating auxiliary hypotheses from the main hypothesis, however, is far from an easy one. and the methodological decisions Popper advises can turn out to be rather arbitrary. For our purposes, the most important and ineliminable of the auxiliary hypotheses are those pertaining to the operationalizations of the theoretical terms that are related in the main hypothesis, because these fulfill the crucial task of making a theoretical claim testable in the first place. Such auxiliaries always enter the test along with the main theoretical hypothesis. And particularly in social and behavioral sciences, accepting operationalization-related auxiliary hypotheses as part of an unproblematic background knowledge is something we cannot and shouldn't do. This is partly because in social and behavioral sciences, theories, including theories of measurement, are not that closely connected to other existing theories in those disciplines. For example, corollaries of contending attention or memory theories are very pertinent to any meaningful psychometric approach, that is to say the measurement theory in psychology, but there's hardly any direct logical connection between them. Besides, in these disciplines, theoretical terms are often necessarily vague, and researchers have a lesser degree of control on the environment of inquiry. So hypothesized relationships can be expected to be spatiotemporally less reliable. Moreover, in the absence of a strong theory of measurement that is informed by the dominant paradigm of the given scientific discipline, the selection of auxiliary hypotheses is usually shaped by the assumptions of the very theory that is to be tested. So as a result, each contending approach develops its own measurement devices regarding the same phenomenon in accordance with its own theoretical postulations. This is, in fact, a very common situation in social and behavioral sciences, which makes it particularly hard and problematic to relegate auxiliary hypotheses to unproblematic background knowledge. It can be argued that one of the main functions of replication studies has always been tackling with various aspects of the problem of underdetermination. Close replications, for instance, test for the validity of auxiliary assumptions, such as the reliability of the instruments or that the original finding is not a statistical fluke. And conceptual replications test for the validity of other auxiliary hypotheses, such as the ones that pertain to the particular operationalizations of variables of interest, or that the results are not due to a methodological artifact. With this in mind, the main function of closed replication attempts is to establish the stability of the association between particular observable variables, and that of conceptual replications is to establish the stability of the association between different observable variables tapping into the same construct. So we can also see as stability across various operationalizations. They also indirectly help towards establishing concurrent validity of the measurement tools. However, neither closed nor conceptual replications can mitigate underdetermination if they are conducted as isolated tests. Let's begin with closed replications. As in here, on the basis of a successful closed replication, what we can say at most is that we ask the same set of questions and manage to receive a consistent answer. So, for instance, Einstein playing the grumpy Smurf. The problem of underdetermination thus haunts us both when closed replication attempts are successful and when they fail. So this is so when they're successful, since the observed effect might be a methodological artifact, as said, and hence closed replications can never be regarded as the ultimate test of a hypothesis. So closed replications are indispensable for testing the stability of the association between observational variables, but they do not provide much information beyond that. For example, a successful closed replication doesn't guarantee that the operationalizations have high content validity, as the relationship between two observable variables with very low content validity can also be quite stable. In other words, false results can be highly reproducible. Can we then infer the falsity of a theoretical claim on the basis of a failed closed replication? No. Closed replication failures actually don't provide us with definitive answers. There are volumes of discussions in the literature about hidden moderators, sampling characteristics, and lots of other differences between the original and replication studies following failures that illustrate what I said. Then what about conceptual replications? It's been put forward by a considerable number of people that conceptual replications, and particularly the ones that yield non-corroborative results, are relatively uninformative and can be easily brushed aside by the original author. The reason is that it is never clear if the differences between the original study and replications indicate a problem with the TH or the auxiliaries in the replication study. So let's say we try to conceptually replicate the study investigating the relationship between intelligence and social class by operationalizing intelligence in terms of IQ and measuring it using the standard Wechsler test, and operationalizing social class in terms of control over means of production measured through occupation. If the outcome of the IQ measures and occupational variance turn out not to be associated in the way predicted by the TH, the original author can easily reject these findings by arguing that the blame lies with either one or both of the new set of auxiliaries used in the second study. So the burden of falsification remains with the auxiliaries instead of the TH. So the scientific community assumes a very close relation between falsifiability and replicability. Thus, replications are seen as the cornerstone or the gold standard of science. This is at least partly because they're intended to mitigate underdetermination. But if replications, as I said, at best only diagnose the truth value of the TH and auxiliaries bundle without indicating whether the TH itself or any number of auxiliaries are chiefly responsible for the observed results, in the long run, replications might just aggravate the ambiguity. So what should we do? The aim is to find a viable falsificationist method for conducting and appraising replication studies in social and behavioral sciences. This requires that we address the distance between the theoretical and observable variables and find a way to decrease the question and answer ratio. So the second task directly addresses the problem Tagliarconi recently underlined in his paper, Generalizability Crisis, but there he calls this the distance between the verbal and the statistical hypotheses. So to this aim, it can actually be possible to dissociate the main theoretical hypothesis and the auxiliary hypotheses to a certain extent, of course, by organizing replications into a pre-planned series whose parts are designed so as to systematically vary the auxiliary hypotheses associated with predictor and outcome variables. Thereby, the ambiguity of falsification can be relatively reduced in the long run, although it might not be absolutely eliminated. The hypothesis testing and replication framework we propose, the SRF, can achieve a relative reduction in this sort of ambiguity and help with the decisions researchers have to take in appraising the results of the original test and those of replication studies. So SRF consists of a systematically organized series of replications that collectively aim towards ascertaining the stability of each leg against the other, remember the invisible table, and ultimately of both legs against the tabletop. The basic idea is to bring close and conceptual replications together in order to weight the effects of the predictor and outcome auxiliaries on the findings. SRF starts with replications as close to the original as possible, like in the step 1 and step 2, and proceed towards more conceptual replications by varying one operationalization at a time and keeping the other constant, and then repeating the procedure for the other leg. So as I said, SRF starts with a close replication of an original finding for the reasons I've previously mentioned regarding the function of closed replications. To recap, this is crucial because we first have to control for artifacts. In other words, we have to inspect whether the relationship between observable variables is stable. Further, the probability of observing a stable relationship between two variables due to such artifacts will be lower when we utilize different auxiliary hypotheses in operationalizing our theoretical variables. This is one of the main arguments actually in favor of conceptual replications. However, as I said, in the face of conceptual replication failures, one can always blame factors other than the TH, so conceptual replications are also not conclusive about the truth value of the TH due to underdetermination. But if either the predictor or the outcome auxiliary is varied while the other is kept constant, we can track changes in the results to discern which one may be chiefly responsible for the difference. For example, A researcher can first keep the outcome variable the same, thereby keeping the first outcome auxiliary constant, while using various different predictor variables, thereby varying predictor auxiliaries. In the next step, a similar diversification procedure is applied to the variable that was kept constant in the previous step, and this time the variable that was being varied in the previous step is kept constant. This procedure allows the researchers to isolate the effects of different auxiliaries and to see if their TH is conditional on particular pairings of predictor and outcome auxiliaries. Now I will briefly walk you through various research scenarios to explicate how SRF operates in concrete. As you also see in the title, one central aspect of SRF is actually being a decision guide. So the first scenario, closed and conceptual replications are successful. This means that the TH has survived a systematically organized series of closed and conceptual replication attempts, and therefore now it is safer to assume that the effect envisioned by the TH is not conditional on particular operationalizations, and its universal application is not falsified. Just to remind, corroboration means that the hypothesis has survived tests, so not that it is confirmed. Second scenario, we have successful closed replications, but either our conceptual replications have failed or yielded mixed results. So at this step here, if we have obtained all conceptual replication failures, the most rational thing would be to abandon the hypothesis. But let's say our results are mixed. So if we obtain mixed results, at this point, let's say, regarding the effect of various operationalizations of X on Y, we should conclude that either the effect observed in the original study and its closed replications, or the null results observed in some of the conceptual replications, indicate a quirk depending on certain operationalizations of the theoretical predictor, the XT. If the researchers reasonably believe that a refined or delimited version of the construct would still be informative, they should select one among the observational predictors, XO, that yielded corroborative results and test it across different operationalizations of Y. If the results of all replications in this configuration are corroborative, then we have failed to falsify that the effect is conditional on certain operationalizations of the predictor term, that's the theoretical predictor. Now we should refine the theoretical predictor term, the XT, so as to have a closer theoretical connection with the predictor auxiliary. If the results are mixed here as well, we can then either abandon the TH or redefine both of the theoretical terms, actually, but then we end up with a more limited or shrinked theoretical hypothesis. So it's a different one or a slightly refined one. It might be fine in certain disciplines, by the way, and especially in the early stages of research programs, because sharpening the theoretical terms themselves might be an advancement of our knowledge regarding a particular phenomenon. So let's come to the third scenario. So closed replications are not successful. Let us suppose that our attempt at closed replication failed, or we obtained non-corroborative evidence already in the original study. So in both cases, the first decision we need to make is whether to modify or abandon the TH or to maintain it. After getting non-corroborative results from the original test or its closed replication, abandoning the TH is obviously a rational option and marks the end of the line. So if the researchers, however, decide to modify the TH instead, for instance, by introducing a possible moderating factor as a new theoretical term into the original TH, then it is game over for that particular hypothesis, and the whole new series of studies will start for the modified hypothesis. So the last scenario, let's say we decided to maintain the TH, now our task is to determine the problematic leg. So if after getting non-corroborative results from the original test or the closed replication, the researchers neither abandon nor modify the TH, but somehow reasonably maintain their tentative belief in its truth, then they have to form a hypothesis that assigns the blame to a factor either in the predictor auxiliary or the outcome auxiliary. So this doesn't need to be regarded necessarily as an attempt to escape falsification, because non-corroborative results in a closed replication, as I said, can indeed be due to various problems associated with particular operationalizations. If this is in fact the case, the TH could in principle be empirically grounded if we used another non-problematic predictor auxiliary or outcome auxiliary. So let us suppose that we suspect the predictor auxiliary to be the problematic leg, then we should keep the outcome auxiliary as constant and vary the predictor auxiliary through various different operationalizations of X. If variation of X in this setting yields corroborative evidence, then we go on with the procedure on the other leg. If all goes well, we can speak of a partial corroboration of the TH because the original set of auxiliaries didn't work. In the other case, let's say we have no consistent results across operationalizations of Y or like mixed results, we can either abandon the TH, which is again a rational decision, or if we still believe that the TH could hold true in a different context or in a more limited sense, we have to define certain boundary conditions of the TH with respect to particular observational XY pairings. In this case, we should reasonably have to redefine the original theoretical terms, the xt and ty, yt, in a more limited and refined manner. Such refinements can be permissible until an alternative hypothesis with more content is proposed and at least partly corroborated. So, what does systematic replications framework do? It reduces underdetermination in original studies as well as in closed and conceptual replications. So primarily, it allows for non-corroborative evidence to have differential implications for the components of the TH and auxiliaries bundle. And thereby, these components can receive blame not collectively, but in terms of a weighted distribution. It won't always be possible to achieve this, of course. And in such cases, where it's not possible, SRF allows demarcating on which pairings from possible predictor and outcome auxiliaries the truth value of the TH is conditional. In all cases, the confounding effects deriving from the auxiliaries can be relatively isolated. And furthermore, the SRF can enable that we approximate to, though arguably not reach, an ideal test of a theoretical hypothesis within the falsificationist paradigm by embedding alternative operationalizations and associated measurement approaches into a severe testing framework. And what is different in SRF? Actually, there are several proposals in the literature that have some similarities to the SRF. For instance, we can mention Sidman, who uses the notion of systematic replication. While his method endorses systematicity, it doesn't address the implications of the DQT I have mentioned. In other words, it doesn't deal with the possible confounding effects of auxiliaries on theory testing, but is rather concerned with varying the components of the original research design to be able to generalize the initial results to broader situations and subjects. And there are some other similar, more recent suggestions for designing meta-studies, for instance, by randomizing independent experimental variables indiscriminately or introducing different operationalizations as random factors into studies. But none of these aim to distinguish the confounding effects of various auxiliary hypotheses on the theoretical hypothesis either. Moreover, it is sequential. A sequential organization of tests in the way we propose has several advantages over bundling several operationalizations together into a single mega study. First, if we were to extend single tests in scope to include more conditions or random factors, we would need unrealistically large sample sizes, and this requirement would limit the economic feasibility of systematization itself. A sequential organization, on the other hand, gives the researchers the choice of modifying or abandoning the theoretical hypothesis in accordance with the results of particular tests before engaging in further data collection. Secondly, it is also usually the case that various auxiliary hypotheses have different degrees of validity and reliability with regard to previous observations. So SRF allows the researchers to identify which leg is potentially the weakest and start the replication studies there. So it provides flexibility. And third, a sequential organization incorporates an element of time into the replication procedure, whereby we also test robustness across time. And lastly, and most importantly, it's falsificationist. The bundling strategy that I mentioned lends itself easily to an inductivist approach, in the sense of either trying to inductively confirm a theoretical statement or at least to quantify its likelihood. Independently of how big the bundle is, this strategy is susceptible to all the logical problems haunting induction. From the falsificationist perspective, we can say that such bundling approaches engage in the impossible tasks of either exhausting all possible auxiliary hypotheses while testing a theoretical hypothesis, or quantifying the likelihood of a hypothesis given the existing evidence. I won't go into the logical critique of likelihood estimates here, but one can find it in various forms in Popper, Lakatos, or neo-Popperians like Mayo. A sequential organization of tests, as we propose under SRF, is more fitting for falsificationist theory testing, since it makes little sense actually to embrace a mega study approach instead of a more economical step-by-step approach if one doesn't intend in the first place to inductively confirm or to quantify the likelihood of a hypothesis. This argument bears on the recent generalizability debate, so I'll underline once more that SRF, like other falsificationist methods, aims to investigate the generalizability of theoretical conjectures rather than the generalizability of findings as such. Its practical implications. SRF can be said to have implications for three broad domains of scientific inquiry, namely in replication studies, via coordinating close and conceptual replications into a more coherent, informative, and critical body of investigations. In hypothesis testing, via providing a severe testing framework in which self-replication attempts can be planned, pre-registered, and implemented. And in literature reviews, via offering an alternative structure of clustering the existing findings in terms of the auxiliary sets that generate them. So I've already covered the practical implications and potential advantages of SRF regarding replication studies. So I'll just say a few things on adversarial collaboration and how it might help in resolving or bracketing auxiliary related disputes. So contested claims and questions are abound in social and behavioral sciences. A case in point would be the heated debate surrounding the question whether exposure to violence in media causes violent behavior. This and similar questions are extremely difficult to definitively answer because the scientific community lacks clear criteria for falsifying points of view and disagrees on key methodological issues. The idea of adversarial collaboration has been articulated a few times in the recent past, most notably by Tetlock in 2006 and by Kahneman in 2010 to tackle this very issue, and has found some realization in the context of literature reviews and meta-analyses, but not in the context of hypothesis testing. However, the aim of the original idea was precisely to organize hypothesis testing. It could not yet be achieved, partly because various parties cannot agree on which particular measures to include in the test of a contested claim or question, and they give up the project of collaborative testing altogether. Adversarial collaboration would be most fruitful in such context of dispute, but the fundamentality of the disagreements make it extremely hard to realize it. SRF can actually facilitate adversarial collaboration in the very context of hypothesis testing, because in such a framework, the parties do not need to agree on particular measures in order to collaborate. They can at least agree on conditionals, as we depict in the decision table, and thus reach consensus in the appraisal of the outcomes of the whole scheme. Such collaboration within SRF would provide more robust hypothesis tests than what can be ascertained through meta-analyses, since the latter is not very sensitive in eliminating false findings from original data sets. So self-replications would also greatly benefit from the SRF. Self-replication is replicating an initial finding before publication, and it has long been considered among the best practice. Nevertheless, the DQT-related problems are also relevant for self-replication efforts. For example, no successful closed self-replication can rule out the possibility that the effect is just a byproduct of particular operationalizations. On the other hand, after a series of failed conceptual replications, the blame can always be relegated ad hoc to a failed manipulation, or and the non-corroborative results can be brushed aside by the authors as unsuccessful pilot studies that are unworthy of reporting. Since the problem of underdetermination equally applies to self-replication studies, organizing them into a logically connected set of replications that systematically vary sets of predictor and outcome auxiliaries can mitigate the resulting ambiguity here as well. We also recommend pre-registering the whole SRF plan before engaging in data collection. Pre-registering SRF in the context of self-replication can facilitate a more rigorous hypothesis testing procedure by decreasing the researcher's degrees of freedom, as widely discussed in the literature. Realistically, it would be, of course, a tentative plan, but it would still inform both the research team and their audience about the initial expectations. At present, the common practice is to pre-register only a single study or a single set of studies where the operationalization of variables and hence the auxiliaries are kept constant. This conventional practice of pre-registering only a single set of operationalizations might, however, pave the way for a setting that condones conducting multiple studies and selectively reporting the studies that corroborated the theoretical hypothesis, the TH. Pre-registering the whole hypothesis testing process that is planned in accordance with SRF can provide protection against such questionable research practices. And since SRF compatible pre-registrations can offer broader protection against researcher degrees of freedom, a separate badge that is similar to the ones awarded for pre-registration or open data or open code can be bestowed on studies that satisfy these criteria. And furthermore, such a practice can function as an incentive to conduct more meticulous hypothesis testing by increasing the scientific community's awareness of the potential effects of the auxiliary assumptions. And lastly, another potential critical implication of SRF lies in using the same strategy of logically connecting different auxiliary bundles in conducting and interpreting systematic literature reviews. This will become particularly useful when the previous findings are mixed. Such a strategy can help researchers distinguish the effects that seem to be driven by certain auxiliaries from the ones in which the TH is more robust to such influences. To put it in a different way, in a contested literature, there are already numerous conceptual replications that have been conducted, and at least some of these replications rely on the same auxiliary hypotheses in their operationalizations. Therefore, to the extent that we have overlaps in these auxiliaries, their results can be organized in such a way that resembles a pattern of results that would have been obtained with a novel research project planned according to the SRF. And in closing, I would like to briefly touch upon some possible questions regarding the implementability and broader implications of the SRF. Firstly, implementing SRF doesn't have to be an all or none strategy. In the case, there are already scattered findings from independent replication attempts. SRF can be used to organize the results as if they belong to a systematic replication scheme. As I have mentioned with respect to literature reviews, it is also possible to use SRF in retrospective appraisal of previous findings pertaining to the same theoretical claim or question. And on a more general note, opting for a series of systematically interconnected tests instead of single studies in deciding the fate of scientific theories clearly implies a slower and more critical process of scientific inquiry, which also requires increased scientific collaboration and collective testing and appraisal of scientific theories. Clearly, the methodological decision between more rigorous tests on the one hand and quicker decisions on the empirical worth of theories on the other is bound to be a collective one, which reflects our collective take on our scientific priorities. We can generally speak of two central missions of scientific inquiry, namely extending the established body of knowledge to include novel phenomena. We can call it science's exploratory mission, and to weed out false theories via testing, replication, crucial experiments, and the like. This is to say science's critical mission. Depending on the state of a particular discipline or research program, one or the other of these two missions might be in fact more accentuated. While in expansionist periods, accumulation of novel hypotheses is prioritized over severe tests or replications of earlier studies or critical assessments of literature, during moments of crisis, the need for disciplinary self-reflection might overcome that for novelty and growth. The decade-long discussion on a replicability and confidence crisis in several disciplines of social, behavioral, and life sciences has actually identified the prioritization of the exploratory over the critical mission as one of the key causes, and led to proposals for slowing science down and inaugurating a credibility revolution. All potential contributions of SRF will be part of a strategy to prioritize science's critical mission on the way towards a more credible research in social behavior and life sciences. This would imply that the scientific community focuses less on producing huge numbers of novel hypotheses with little corroboration, and more on having a lesser number of severely tested theoretical claims. Successful implementation of SRF clearly requires openness and transparency regarding both positive and negative results of original and replication studies, and demands increased collaboration, ideally also adversarial collaboration. Such a turn would also require that the scientific community places less emphasis on eminent individual scientists as epistemic authorities and more on team effort. So this was my last slide. I haven't populated the slides with lots of references or any references at all, actually, but you can see here the link to the whole text, the preprint text, where you can find all the references. And I will be very happy to hear your comments, questions, both right now, and if you don't have the time, also later. So I'll end now.
Thank you very much. On behalf of everyone.
I thank you for listening.
So